Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my winter TBR video talking about the books that I plan to read over the winter months. Now, because I live in Canada, winter is basically like 8 months long, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to say that these are books I'm going to be reading roughly between November to February, and then I'll mix it up again with my spring TBR. I'm still reading through my spooky season TBR, which if I remember, I'll have linked down below, but if you want to know what is coming up in my reading plans, this is a great video to catch you up, and if you want to line up your own reading so that you're reading along with me, definitely let me know. I'm going to have timestamps for the different genres that I read, and this is kind of a unique time of year for me because for a few reasons. One being the fact that while I do a lot of review reading for different publishers, the review books kind of slow down around the holidays. There just aren't a lot of November and December releases, and so I won't be doing as much of that, which means that this video is going to be focused on backlist titles especially. And also, I get a big chunk of time off work because my office closes between Christmas and New Year's every year. So of course, with that extra vacation time, instead of spending time with my loved ones, I spend it reading. I'm just kidding, but kind of not. I see my relatives, but then I also enjoy spending extra time reading, which means that I get a chance to get into some really big, chunky books that just kind of help to honestly slow down my reading. I do a lot of rereading and just kind of take that time to read whatever I want and not worry about pressure from publishers to get certain videos or certain books read by a certain date. So it's just kind of a nice free time for me. And so yes, I have some plans for these time period, but I'm also going to allow myself to mood read a lot. All that being said, let's get into the specific books. Now, let's start by talking about horror and thriller books, starting with my yearly reread of Nosferatu by Joe Hill. I read this book every single Christmas. Except I lied, I actually did not get to read it last year. I planned to, but I can't remember what happened. I think things just came up and I got distracted, and then kind of the holiday season came and went. And so this year I definitely have to get back to it because I haven't gone a single year before then without rereading this book. And so yes, while I have a physical copy, I'm planning on rereading it via the audio done by Kate Mulgrew, who is my girl. And this book is dark and creepy, and I love to read it around Christmas because of course you have the villain Charlie Manx taking away children to Christmas land, and then you have songs like Jingle Bells making appearances within the book as it plays on the radio at the wrong time of year, and it's just like the creepiest Christmas book I can think of. I love it so much. Highly recommend it, and we'd love to know, is anyone going to join me on this? I would love to see more people reading it this year. Then with my patron book club for December, we're going to be reading December Park by Ronald Malfi. This is actually a reread for me, and I almost wonder if the book club picked it because the title has the word December in it, so they thought that was kind of perfect. This book actually doesn't necessarily take place around Christmas. Instead, it really takes place over the course of a year. We follow a young group of boys who, in their small town, there appears to be some kind of serial killer on the loose, or at least the young women in this town are going missing. And so they believe there is a man known as the Pied Piper who is taking all the girls away. And so they try to investigate, figure out what is happening. And again, we follow them in this basically coming of age narrative that's kind of in the style of something like It, but without the supernatural elements. If you know my channel, you know that I love Ronald Malfi. I think he is such a good storyteller, and I love a lot of his books, but this one is probably my favorite, and I'm really excited to reread it with all of them. So looking forward to that reread, and I hope it lives up to my memory of it, which was perfection. Then I want to do a reread of Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle, and this is a very topical horror story that follows a man who gets in trouble with the police, and instead of taking him to the station where they would have to do all the paperwork, they drop him off at a mental hospital, and he has to spend time there until he's able to get released. And so it's a story that is part horror story because there is a light horror supernatural element to this place, but then in a lot of ways this is really more about the horror of real life and reality and how we treat those that are shown or believed to be having mental illness. And I think that it's just a really important story. It's one of the first books I read by Victor LaValle, and he's since then definitely become a favorite of mine. So I want to revisit this one because I liked it, but it was much more grim and depressing than I was expecting it to be. I don't know why I didn't realize that when I went into it the first time. And so I want to revisit it during the jolly holiday season for whatever reason. But knowing how much I love The Changeling, I really want to go back to this one and see how my feelings change and evolve now that I'm more familiar with the author's larger work. Next, I want to try Dracul by Dacre Stoker. I hope I said that right. And this essentially is a prequel to Dracula, which is one of my all-time favorite horror classics. And I know that it's written by a relative of Bram Stoker, and so I'm really excited to see what he has done with the original tale. Even though it's a prequel, I expected it to be really poorly reviewed, but the ratings on Goodreads I believe are actually quite good, and again, because it's a favorite classic, I'm really hoping I'll connect with it as well. I don't always love vampire stories, but I do like ones like this where it's very much based off the classic roots, and the vampires, well, aren't so sparkly. And I also want to try The Last Werewolf by Glenn Duncan, and this I know is a literary horror story, which is something I don't check out enough. I'm always a little bit intimidated by horror stories that get the literary label, but I understand that this follows a man who is the last werewolf, and it is following him in his days of solitude, and so it's supposed to be very slow paced, very character driven, very slow in nature, and not always the kind of book that I'm always drawn to. But again, I've noticed over the last few years that my tastes in horror have really changed. I have started this book in the past and put it down, but now I have a feeling that it really could be a favorite, and I'm very excited to return back to it. Next is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff, and this is like a horror fantasy book that I actually don't know much about. I was a little bit turned off by it because I really thought it was just going to be like another cutesy fantasy vampire story, but then Mike from Mike's Book Reviews checked out this one and gave it a gushing review on his channel and said that it was really dark and really just went back to the horror roots again of vampires, and so I'm really excited to check it out based off of his love for it. And I gotta say though, Mike, if these vampires start sparkling, I'm coming for you because you promised me that this is gonna be dark, and I'm gonna hold you to that. So I hope this book doesn't disappoint me. And I picked out a few thrillers I want to check out this winter, the first one being The Snowman by Joe Nesbo. This is a really popular, beloved, best-selling Scandinavian author that I've wanted to check out for quite a while. And I don't think this is the first book in his Harry Hole series, but it's definitely one of the most popular ones. I think involves a serial killer that every time he kills someone, he leaves a snowman in their place. And it just sounds like a really creepy synopsis, and Scandinavian fiction is just known to be really dark and disturbing, which, if you know my channel, is right up my alley, so I'm hoping that this one will work very well for me. And more of a literary thriller I want to check out is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is a story of a group of students in university that decide to kill off one of their classmen. And it's not so much a whodunit, but perhaps a why they have done it. I believe this is very character driven, it's very slow moving, and again, it might be too slow moving for my taste, but this is the time of year that I like to read the really big chunky books. I have nothing better to do over my holidays, and I do want to give it a try. I've been starting to get into dark academia, and this is definitely one on my list that I'd like to give a try to at least. Now, switching over to science fiction, in November we are going to be reading Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, which is a reread for me. I've read the entire trilogy, but I would like to reread the trilogy because I have mixed feelings about books 2 and 3. So depending on how this goes, I might continue on to the later 2 books. But this is a really unique story that is told from the perspective of an artificial intelligence who is previously tethered to a ship. They have since separated their entity, and this book is basically a revenge plot as they go to seek out those that have done things, and I'll leave it really vague. But I'm excited to revisit this one again. It is dark, and I've read it a few times now, and every time I get more out of it, so I'm hoping that'll happen once again. And more importantly, I'm really hoping that my book club enjoys it, because I've mentioned that I would say more of the members lean towards horror, but I'm trying to nudge more science fiction into the group, so every third month we do a sci-fi book, and so this is the one they picked out for November. Then this winter I want to do a big readathon of a bunch of Neil Stephenson books. I really think he can become a favorite author of mine, but I'd like to read more of his work before officially saying that. And so I want to start by doing a reread of Snow Crash, which is his iconic cyberpunk book involving a character named Hero, who is a pizza delivery boy, but also a hacker. And this book is just so cool. The first time I read it, I didn't feel like I fully appreciated it, and so I want to reread it again. I now have an audiobook version, and I'm dying to get into it. And then from there, I want to read his other really iconic cyberpunk book, which is Diamond Age, and that one honestly I know even less about. It'll be my first time reading it, and I do once again have the audio for that because I got it as an Audible exclusive on a sale, and I'm really hoping that will work for me as well because I'm slowly getting more comfortable into the genre and just want to kind of get my full roots decent understanding of the books that really popularized cyberpunk on the page. And then from there, if I'm not burnt out, I would also like to read some more Neil Stephenson, and I'm thinking I'm going to do Terminal Shock, which is this book that came out last year, and I just didn't get to it before I filmed my best science fiction of 2021. So it's one that I've been meaning to get to, but it's pretty large, so even for me, I kind of keep putting it off. But again, over Christmas, I got lots of reading time, so it's the perfect time to read this chunky monkey. And I'm also hoping to read through Children of Time and its subsequent companion novels, all by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I previously read his other series and I've been really enjoying that, so I'm excited to get back to his backlist title. I know that the final book, or at least the third book in the series, is coming out early from Orbit in January, and so I want to get all caught up. I understand that this is a story involving a planet where we have accidentally released spiders that have become hyper intelligent, and we are watching them evolve, and part of the story is told from the spider's perspective. It sounds really cool, really up my alley, and I really like Adrian Tchaikovsky's ideas, and so I'm hoping this one will work really well for me. Then for something a little bit more light, I want to finally get to the Thrawn original trilogy, all by Timothy Zahn. So we have Heir to the Empire, this is book 3, so then we have Dark Force Rising, and finally The Last Command. I've had these books forever, and I've put these on previous TBRs, and they're not happening, so this winter, this Christmas, these need to happen. I always get in a Star Wars mood over the holidays, and so these are definitely my next Star Wars books that are very high up on my reading list. And I also really want to read Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I want to call this a sci-fi classic, but I know it's not that old, and I always get in trouble when I say that. But it's a very beloved science fiction book that I believe is written as a novel, but reads like a short story collection involving a group of travelers that go to another planet. And I actually don't know if there's first contact, but I believe that it's just supposed to be very literary and thoughtful and character driven. And again, everyone loves it online, and I do have a copy that was gifted to me, so I definitely want to check it out. Hopefully very early into the new year if I don't get to it before the end of 2022. As well, I'm hoping to get to House of the Sun by Alistair Reynolds, and this is a standalone space opera story that involves artificial intelligence. I honestly don't know too much about it, but it's one of those books that ends up on the top of everyone's favorite science fiction reads of all time. I hear nothing but gushing things about it, and I'm really excited to get to it. I've read a few things by this author now, and I really think that this might be my favorite of his. I just need to read it first and confirm if that theory is true. And finally, for epic science fiction, I want to read The Dreaming Void and its 2 sequels, all by Peter F. Hamilton. And this is epic space opera that follows a future where there is this void that causes people to dream or have some sort of psychonic or telepathic abilities. And I'm very much intrigued by this one. It's been recommended to me a lot, especially because of my love for horror and that it supposedly leans into some of those elements. I know it's not actually horror, but people say that I will like it based off my love of some other ideas surrounding horror. So I'm very much intrigued by this one. And so I probably am going to check it out first, even though I know his other series is a little bit more popular. I do want to get to Pandora's Star and its sequel, but that'll probably happen on a future TBR. And finally, let's talk fantasy. I got some really ambitious plans. So first off, I want to finally get through this catch-up reread of The Traitor Berger Cormorant and its 2 sequels. So once again, I have previously read this book, but I haven't gone on and caught up with the series. I believe the final book is coming out next year or sometime soon, and so I want to be ready for it. This series follows a woman whose people were taken over by a warring foreign nation, and they took them over with sort of a cultural victory, and so they stripped away their culture, their identity, and then in her way to get revenge and try to take back what is hers, she ends up becoming an accountant, and through her economic work, she tries to take down this empire from the inside. And I just think it's such a brilliant idea. I have a commerce major, I have taken economic classes, and so this just really appeals to the business nerd within me, and I really like to revisit it. And again, the 2 sequels are really chunky. I've never read them. I really don't hear a lot of people talking about the sequel, so I'm definitely hoping they live up to how much I enjoyed the first book, which was fantastic and dark, and I loved it. And I'm also hoping to do a reread of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So of course we have the Fellowship of the Ring, we have the 2 Towers, and then the Return of the King. But while I'm showing you my physical copies, this time around I want to do these on audio because I got the new version that is done by Andy Serkis, who is Gollum, and I'm really excited because I heard that they're amazing, and I'm going to have to decide whether or not I'm going to speed through the Tom Bombadil parts because people told me last time I read these that a lot of people gave me permission to skip those parts. Let me know down in the comments if that's still acceptable or if you will send me hate mail for doing so. But besides the Tom Bombadil parts and some of the singing, I loved everything else about this series, and I have a feeling I'm going to love it even more in reread because that's the kind of person I am. Is you don't always know it on my channel, but I do a lot of rereading, and that's typically how I fall in love with books. I struggle to give books 5 stars the first time around, but once I become familiar with the stories, once they become like putting on a comfy shirt or a warm blanket that I'm really familiar with, then they become all-time favorites of mine, which I think is going to happen this time with Lord of the Rings. And I'm also hoping to get to The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, which is an epic fantasy series that I don't know a lot about except for the fact that it is constantly named as one of the major influences that George R. R. Martin had when he created the Song of Ice and Fire series, which of course I love, and so I do want to go back to his inspiration. But I've also been warned that the Bone Chair series is very classic in nature, which doesn't always work for me. And while it was the inspiration for George R. R. Martin's work, if I'm looking for some of those grim, dark, just blade twisting aha moments and some of the things I love so much about his series, I may not necessarily find that in his inspiring work. So we shall see. I've read Tad Williams before, but only his science fiction, so it's about time that he tried out his fantasy, which he's definitely more well known for. And I want to read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shanning, which is a standalone book that I want to read particularly now because in February there is supposed to be a prequel book coming out. And again, I don't know a lot about it. I know that this is a book involving dragons. It, I believe, has a sapphic romance at the middle of the story. And it's big and chunky and it's just the perfect time to read it, so I'm ready to go when that prequel comes out. So hopefully I can beg for a review copy because it's going to be a really long wait on the library loan, I'm sure. But definitely I've heard great things about that one, and I'm hoping it works really well for me. And I also want to read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo because once again there is a sequel book coming out, and I want to check out the first book and see if it's up my alley. I know this is a dark academia fantasy novel, and again I'm getting more into dark academia, and so I want to try this one out. I know it has tons of content warnings for sexual assault and things like that, but I tend to be able to handle some really rough subject matter and some really unlikable characters, so I don't think that'll be a problem for me. I will keep you posted once I read it. And for something a little bit different, I do want to check out The Shadow of the Wind, which is a really iconic fantasy book that I think is pretty light in fantasy. Maybe it's more magical realism, but it's this amazing literary work that everyone describes as one of their all-time favorite books. And when a book just gets that much praise and just becomes people's all-time favorite, it's definitely one that I want to try out for myself, just because there must be something really unique about it that makes it so beloved. And so obviously I'm hoping it's going to work for me as well, and I'm really excited to get into it. So stay tuned for that. If I finish it, I'll review it and let you all know. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you hoping to check out for yourself? And I would also love to hear your winter plans. So do you have any specific books you plan to read? Or do you have a general rule of thumb for the types of books you try to read over the Christmas season? I know for a lot of people, they like to read really cute, cozy Christmas romances and contemporary stories and all of that. But you know me, I'm usually reading a horror book on Christmas Day. I'm that Grinchy person. So if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and true crime. If you want to help me out with this video, you can share it around online, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment, even if just a stack of books. And if you want to help me out more, you can hit that little notification bell. That way you never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.